Hello, everybody. This is my office, and I'm Mike Wiese. Last time we talked, it was a Sunday morning, and I was in my home, and I was getting ready for church. But now it's a Friday afternoon, and it's the end of a busy work week. A lot of things accomplished. There's been some challenges. There's been a lot of opportunities. Jesus is on my back corner over here, and he's laughing at me. I always remind myself of Jesus is looking at me, and sometimes he's laughing at me. Today we're going to do our first little lecture on the material. Please make sure that you've read chapter 1. At this point in time, you need to begin to stay very close to the Hosmer material. I'm going to provide little PowerPoint presentations, so I'll be referring to that. You're also supposed to be filling out the discussion comments and interacting with each other about this particular material. So you ready to go to work? Let's do an overview of ethical decision making. I feel it. This is really cool. Chapter number 1 focuses on an overview of the Hosmer model for dealing with ethical dilemmas. They happen, and I find myself confronted with what should I do? Sometimes those opportunities to make decisions about ethical challenges come quite by surprise, and I have to really dig down deep to find out what's in me at that moment to make a decision that I'm proud of. Other times situations occur and I'm allowed to go through a process, and over the years I've become very good at a process of ethical decision making that I want to help you understand, and hopefully it will be good for you as you are confronted with those challenges. So there's those that come that we can analyze and make a decision and hopefully then implement a compelling moral argument for our decision. Our hope is that that compelling moral argument will be a claim that helps us win the day in our organizational setting, allowing us to not only make a decision that is best for us, but also a decision that is best for the culture of the organization. We're trying to build a healthy moral culture within the organizations, within the spheres of influence that we have. What will really test me most is if a situation comes and right in that moment I have to prove what I'm made out of, and that's where I back up to my values. It's where I really find out what my values truly are. If my values in reality in the crisis are contrary to the values that I espouse or I try to model, then there's probably a problem. So in my life, I'm always trying to discern what are the core values that are driving my behaviors and how are those influencing the decisions I make in business. Because in business, there's going to be moral conflict. And moral conflict are those times in which the organization's performance, its financial performance, its desire for profitability, and its social performance are not congruent. They are clashing. In this class, you're going to be challenged to identify a personal ethical dilemma that you've lived or you've observed, or maybe that you're living right now. Well, I'm living one right now. I have to make a decision. One of the schools that I teach for, not Point Loma, has certain policies about bookstore orders from professors that require us to go directly to the bookstore and to never give students access to books outside of the bookstore realm. And I know as a fact that the books that I'm ordering through the bookstore are costing my students significantly more than if the students would go and find alternative sources directly through the publisher. And so what do I do? Should I share that information with my students or should I not? The contract with the college says I should not. I've been explicitly told I should not. But then I have this social performance issue. I'm supposed to be serving my students, and many of them are financially challenged, and they're looking for the best way to provide the education at the lowest possible cost. And books are extremely expensive. And if there's a monopoly and the students don't have access to resources through various sources that allow them to get the best possible deal, then I feel like I'm putting a social burden on them. And so the institution's saying that there's an economic performance. We make more money if all the book orders go from the faculty members to the bookstore and the students have to go directly to the bookstore. That's the economic performance argument. I'm also concerned about the social performance, our responsibility to serve our students and to do it in a way that minimizes their costs and increases their access to higher education. I've got a dilemma. What am I going to do? The classical view of social responsibility or ethics is pretty simple. It's that a business has primarily, first and foremost, a duty to maximize profit. Yes, we want to maximize profit in a way that is legal. We want to follow the legal precepts. But our primary duty is not to do social good. Our primary duty is to do economic good. And we do economic good, and through the classical view, we do social good by making a good product at a fair price that people have a choice to buy. When they buy it, they like it, they buy it again. Social responsibility fulfilled. This particular view is best espoused by an author. I'm going to reach for the book. It's called Free to Choose. Hope I can find it fast. Here it is. Free to Choose by Milton Friedman. He's a Nobel Prize winner in economics from the University of Chicago. And in this book, he articulates his position, which many people definitely espouse today, that the real purpose of business is to make financial gain. And the way that you do that is to make a good product or service the marketplace wants, and that is your social responsibility. Spending money to help solve local problems, or giving to the United Way directly from the corporation's funds, or being too concerned and going over your expectations, legal expectations about environmental concerns, or contributing money to try to eliminate illiteracy in the community. All those things are good, and they should be done by individual people. But the corporation, the business, according to Friedman, no. The corporation needs to be focusing on making a good product or service and selling it at a fair price, and yes, doing it under the legal mandates. Beyond that, it's individuals' freedom to choose, not the organization's freedom to choose. So that's a view that sees this balance between economic performance and social performance as one that should tilt organizationally to business performance, not to social performance. But increasingly in the last 20, 30 years, that's not been the expectation of society. And more business leaders have said to themselves, we're members of the community. And as leaders of an organization, we have financial clout, and we also have power and authority that gives us an expectation and maybe a mandate. It is a core value of ours that what we need to be doing in the organization is, yes, do our best to make good money, but also to do it in a way that is socially responsible, a way that brings betterment to society, a way that extends our duties beyond just financial duties to how we can serve in our community and how we can enable and empower other people within our organization to be aware of stakeholder opportunities and needs beyond just ourselves, and to extend ourselves to those areas. And so as human beings, personally, aren't you dealing with some of those issues? How do I make a good living, but how do I do it in a way that brings glory to God? How do I do the very best I can financially, but how do I also live a life that is congruent with the type of society that I want to build for myself, for my kids, and for my grandkids? And so organizations are saying, increasingly, we have an expectation for social responsibility we're placing upon ourselves. Maybe in some cases, we're doing that because the customer expects it, and if they do not see us as socially responsible, then they will maybe not see our products as favorably. So maybe there's a public relations or even a profit motive there. Other cases, organizations and leaders are saying, no, I think as part of our core values that it's important that we be driven by more than just financial end. Irregardless of your view, the classical view or the social responsibility view, which might be a good thing to talk about in your discussion. Regardless of your view, there are those challenges, those points in times when me as an individual, both as an employee and as a manager and as a boss, confronts those times when I don't know what I should do. Financially, it makes sense to do one thing. but I feel like there's a social performance expectation on the other hand, and I've got to make a choice. And when I make a choice, there's going to be some harm. Somebody is going to be minimized, or profit's going to be minimized. And that is a conflict. And that ethical conflict is the point that we want to focus on in this class. How do we resolve that ethical conflict? So Hosmer provides a model. This model sorry, I'm kind of a goofball. This model provides some direction to help us make these ethical decisions. And we need to understand from the get-go that as we are working in organizations, there are different understandings and standards. I come from a distinctive perspective. I've been informed in my life by certain precepts. My experiences have shaped who I am. I have certain beliefs that dictate what I think is true. As a result, I bring myself to the workplace. I'm Mike Wiese. Other people come from different perspectives, different belief systems, different social norms. They have different goals, and as a result, this melting pot of different people with different perspectives creates opportunity and maybe even tension, possibility for us to work together in community, or maybe for us to splinter into different sects that have different opinions as to what ought to be. And so I need to bring myself to the workplace, but I also need to understand the different standards of others. What are the other entities in this dilemma's personal goals? What are their norms? How have they been socialized to expect what are appropriate and inappropriate behaviors? What are their beliefs? What are the starting premises that guide what they believe is true? And then what are their personal values? And to me, ethical decisions are driven out of personal values. And I can articulate my personal values, but in the point of conflicts, when I find out what my personal values really are. I also need to recognize that there are varying impacts to other people. Every time there's an ethical dilemma, there's going to be some people that benefit. There's going to be other people that are harmed. By definition, an ethical dilemma is one where there is the potential for harm. There's going to be some rights exercised, some people who have their rights restored or protected, and others who have their rights denied. That's what makes it an inherent conflict. And so as I'm dealing with ethical dilemmas, it's important for me to state the ethical dilemma, to know what it is, to define the complete moral problem. And I'm going to be illustrating this through the course of the semester with my little challenge that I have about book orders. I mean, right now, should I submit my book orders to the bookstore as I've been instructed, or should I also, in addition to that, let my students know that there's an alternative link that allows them to buy the book direct if they choose? That's my moral dilemma. In order to make that determination, I'm going to determine my economic outcomes. And so Hosmer is going to take you through a chapter, I think it's chapter number 2, that talks about the use of economics to try to understand the outcomes, therefore informing what is the right choice ethically. Because inherently we're looking at economic performance in contrast to social performance. So those are the things that are conflicting here. Economic outcomes will be very important. Most people start with the law. That's going to be chapter number 3. They say, what's legal? And so we need to be looking at the legal requirements as kind of a foundation or maybe a starting point for our determination of what's appropriate. And then we're going to evaluate the ethical duties, and there's some great material that has been developed over hundreds and even thousands of years that help us understand different ways of viewing ethical duties. And we'll be digging into that material to try to understand what are the tools from ethical duties that help inform our personal decision. The outcome of this is to make a decision, and then to be able to have a compelling moral argument for why that decision is appropriate. One that can win the day even if others do not share our particular goals, norms, beliefs, or values. Many times in organizations, I've been able to express why I believe something is the right decision and to offer win-win solutions, alternatives from the action that was perceived as negative by me to actions that will help us achieve our organizational goals without this ethical dilemma. And increasingly, no, I shouldn't say increasingly, but significantly over time, that compelling moral argument has won the day. Not always. There's been one time in my career that we confronted an impasse where ethically I realized that that organization was incongruent with who I am. And as I articulated my own value system and how I think particular things should go to balance economic and social performance, we were at an impasse. I was not asked to leave, but it was made very clear to me that if I did not conform, that I would not fit. Therefore, I opted out of that organization. But it's the only time in my entire career that it got bad enough that I realized that this is not a place for me. Now, that doesn't mean there haven't been conflicts since then. And there have been some times that maybe we have to agree to disagree. But I've never been in a place where I've had such a moral conflict with the organization that I did not feel compatible with the organization and had to leave. That's a wonderful thing. A lot of that's because I think I've gotten good at this ethical analysis and being able to develop a compelling moral argument. And that's what my hope is for you, that in this class you'll develop your ability to do just that. Now, there are sources of moral standards. For me, there's no doubt that I've been informed by my religious beliefs and traditions. I grew up in a Christian home. My parents taught me the concepts of the Bible. There were specific expectations of the faith. We believe in Jesus Christ. We believe in serving Him and serving others. We believe that there is reward on earth, reward in heaven for doing the right thing here on earth. We believe that we can be redeemed. We believe we can make mistakes and sin, but still find forgiveness. Those are beliefs that drive my value system. And within the construct of a church and the traditions and the expectations of a church, my norms have been formed, and there are some traditions that are very important to me that inform what I do and how I do things. And so Mike Wiese is very much a product of my religious and cultural norms. We have various cultural norms. I mean, we have within the Christian church, there's all kinds of different cultural norms. And of course, if you're from a Jewish tradition or a Muslim tradition or a Hindu tradition or from a non-church tradition, those traditions also have their cultural norms and traditions that greatly influence who you are. Currently, I've got a couple wonderful Muslim students here at the university I'm teaching at, and it's been fun to get to know them and find out the similarities in our norms and our traditions. Even though a lot of people might think they're in contrast from each other, I've just been greatly touched by the degree to which we agree, and that our bottom line foundational reasons for existing are very similar. And so it's important to know yourself, but also to have empathy and understanding of the beliefs and norms and traditions of others. Obviously, an economic situation can be a source of moral standards. When you're confronted with economic challenges or economic pressures, there's great temptation. And oftentimes in organizations, those temptations that cause people to yield. Thinking about what happened at Wells Fargo in this last few years that led to just terrible consequences for many people and undermined the integrity of Wells Fargo, and how that probably started on some level with cultures and norms within an organization that focus so much on achieving short-term profit, on making goals and being able to demonstrate your fulfilling monthly expectations for new accounts, and how that eventually led to a culture where 5,000 people were creating accounts for people, current customers, that they were not authorized to create. Thus, fee structures that were feeding into the profitability of the firm that were so incremental that a lot of people didn't notice. Created a great conflict which has undermined the integrity, led to leadership challenges, caused many people to lose jobs, and a great controversy. There's been others that happened just recently. I was reading one at a bank just today that came out the same types of pressures. And so those economic situations create temptations. And then there's social situations. Now, we all know within groups of people, there can be pressures. There can be peer pressure. There can be influences that come from family. There can be influences that come from friends networks. When we work with a group of people, those standards, my standards can be informed and maybe even shaped and changed by other people influences because I want to be popular. I want to be accepted. I want to be liked. And because of those things, it can become sources of moral standards. Oftentimes, that leads to a real disconnect. Remember Mike Wiese at home? And Mike Wiese at church, and Mike Wiese at work. Is that the same person? Well, sometimes social and economic situations can call into question whether or not the same Mike Wiese is in all three places. A few years ago, I wrote a little book called, that was really on the focus of work. I forgot the name of my own book. It was, gosh, I need to show it to you. Here it is. Wrote a little book called Work That Matters. There it goes. Bridging the gap between work and worship. And the focus of this book is me as a Christian. How does that influence the way I work? I'm going to bridge that gap between work and worship so that when I'm at work, I see that as a worship experience. And so that's what I'm kind of struggling with in my life. How can my work increasingly be congruent with who I am when I'm in other places where the social expectations and norms might be that I'm holy? Am I really that way consistently, regardless of where I'm at? All right, let's go to the next one. So those determinants of moral solutions or standards, determinants of moral standards. I think we've already talked about these: expectations of outcomes, behavior, thought, personal values, priorities about outcomes, behavior, and thought. And the point I want to make here is those personal values, I think, are buried really down deep inside of us. And when we are confronted with an ethical dilemma, that's when they come out. A few years ago, I found myself in a situation where I put my life at risk because of something I was doing that was good. I was walking rim to rim in the Grand Canyon. I did it in one day. Now, I trained in Indiana. I had never been to the Grand Canyon before. But on that one day, with a group of friends who do this all the time, we decided to walk the Grand Canyon. I was the oddball, not really prepared even though I'd trained, not really understanding the expectations. We walked down the South Kaibab Trail, across the Grand Canyon, got to Cottonwood Camp. Gear not for the night, gear for just a one-day hike, ready to go up the North Kaibab. And I decided I was done. I wanted to quit. I thought, okay, I'll sleep tonight. Tomorrow I'll walk out. My friends were very focused on a goal. They wanted to finish the hike in one day. 21 miles, rim to rim, one day. One of my best friends in the world, a guy I've gone on a lot of adventures with, who I trust. We're business partners. I trust this man. I convinced him to leave me, to walk up the North Kaibab, to leave me by myself in the Grand Canyon. In that moment, survival for me meant rest. In that moment, achievement for him meant get to the other side. He left me by myself in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. He walked about another mile and a half, and he was at a watering hole where there happens to be one individual who at that point lived in the Grand Canyon. He was in charge of the water supply. He's also an artist. He was in his home. He walked about 100 yards across this field to the well. He came up to this party of people who had just left me in the Grand Canyon by myself without supply. And he said, "Is there something wrong? I've got this premonition that you guys are in trouble." And my friends go, "No, we're not in trouble. Everything's cool. We're good." I said, "Are you sure? Are you part of that church group that's going rim to rim today?" And they go, "Yeah." And he goes, "You guys aren't supposed to do that. That's dangerous. You should not do that in one day. Are you sure you're okay?" And my friend goes, "Well, we had one other person. He got tired, so he decided he was going to just spend the night in the canyon." And this guy goes, "What? You left somebody in the Grand Canyon by themselves? Do they have supply?" "No." "Are they healthy?" Well, yeah. Where are they from? Are they used to this terrain? No, he's from Indiana. Does he have any acute illnesses like asthma? Yeah. You guys get right back there right now and you get him out of the Grand Canyon. And they walked back to me, and I was sleeping happily on a log, and they woke me up, and I got up, now refreshed, and we walked up the North Kaibab, and I did a rim to rim. But my friend and I have talked many times about that moment where his goal, his economic performance goal, was to achieve the rim to rim. And in that moment, my responsibility goal was to rest, and how they conflicted. And at that point in time, I became very, very convincing to leave me stupid. And he became very convincing to continue stupid. At that moment in time, our values, which up to that point were congruent, separated. Now, this might sound like a far-fetched story, but I encourage you to go to Harvard Business Review and look up the parable of the Sadhu. Parable of the Sadhu is a story of a business person that this really happened to. Happened as he was climbing much more dangerous mountains. But the illustration of the impact that this has in organizations. So you might want to look up the Parable of the Sadhu from Harvard Business Review. The point is, there's those points where you find out what your values really are in the crisis. So, analysis for ethical problems in management. This is the next slide. We're going to, in this course, learn to do economic analysis, legal analysis, and ethical duty analysis. I want to leave you with one more thought. You're working on a Master of Business Administration. Do you have any idea what that term administration means? Well, look it up. Post what you find. Let's have a little discussion. Maybe you're earning an MBA because you think it's going to make you more money. That's a good thing. Or maybe you think it's going to make you more prestigious and powerful. Those are good things. But the term administration, you're going to be master of what? Consider it. Find out what it means. Let's talk about it. That's the first chapter. Welcome to my office. I'm Mike Wiese. It's good to learn with you. Bye-bye.